Madlab Performance presents The Lab Podcast. Here's your host and chief mad scientist, Dan Gilbert.
Hello and welcome everybody to The Lab. I'm sitting here with Luke, the Patriot, Hillman. Luke?
As always.
And today we are covering... What are we covering today, Luke?
We are covering assessments. The importance, why we do them, how we do them, all that good stuff.
I feel like the assessment process is something that not obviously, your amateur lifters, your new lifters, people getting into exercise, obviously.
It's non-existent a lot.
Yeah, a lot. But even your professionals, I feel like in the industry, don't really do assessments, or all they do is like a conditioning assessment and don't really take a look at how people move at all. And
that matters?
Believe it or not, Luke, yes, it matters an awful lot, for sure. So I think it's an important topic.
Fantastic. I'm glad you feel that way, Dan.
Thanks, man.
So to get us started off here, Dan, what's the importance of the assessment here? Why do I need to assess somebody when you first get in front of them? Why are we doing that? Why can't I just throw them on the floor? Just get them working out.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, Luke, the Patriot Hillman.
Yeah.
The first thing that comes to mind is you got to see what kind of movements somebody can do safely. So if we're just thinking about safety and injury prevention and lowering injury risk, we need to find out what somebody can do and not have pain, or what somebody can do and not get hurt, whether it's in the weight room or creating an imbalance that hurts them outside of the weight room. I think that is of utmost importance. And then on top of that, you want to find out where somebody is and what they can progress to so that they can perform better and get more of what they want and whatever their goal is, whether their goal is body composition or it's athletic or it's movement-oriented or whatever.
Nice. So I guess one of the things I would ask about there, because I think the biggest thing is when people think as body composition, I would say from what I've heard, when someone's just going for body composition, they don't think that how you move matters. Do you see that a lot? Because I hear and see that a ton.
So there's so many ways to address this.
I just want to look good.
Let's not even talk about, because sometimes people that when somebody's goal is really just looking good and they're after that, they're willing, whether it's subconscious or not, they're willing to risk an awful lot to get there.
Yeah.
Right? We see that a lot. So let's not address even the injury aspect yet. Let's just address their goal.
Okay.
Right? I have a body composition goal. I want to look a certain way. Let's say I want to look like this celebrity or this fighter or this basketball player, football player, whatever, right? I have a goal. I want to look like this. If I am not assessed, then if I'm not assessed, then it's hard to tell where my weaknesses are so that I can work on, so that I can help build muscle more properly or lose weight in an easier way and really start to form my body. And it's harder to know if my programming is creating more asymmetry. So you'll get people that, for example, they'll go, just looking in the mirror is like their only assessment.
Yeah.
And they go, all right, I'm pretty happy with my shoulders. I'm pretty happy with my biceps, my arms in general, but I need to work on my chest.
Pretty sure I did this morning.
This is super common. This actually, I've actually done this in my younger lifting days. And then they're like, I need to work on my chest. So common sense dictates I need to do more chest exercises, right? So now I'm doing a lot more pressing, a lot more horizontal pressing. I'm on the bench press. I'm doing push-ups. I'm doing dumbbell press. I'm doing all sorts of different kind of flies, like 15 variations of the fly or whatever, right? And mostly what I'm doing at this point, especially if I already have an existing asymmetry due to sitting and have some shoulders rounded forward, I'm probably tightening my chest up. And yes, I am building some muscle, but I'm tightening my chest up. My shoulders start to roll forward. I start to use different muscles in my pressing movements. And now I'm getting more anterior delt locked in. My scapula and my shoulder blades, my scalp is probably not as stable as it should be. And it's much harder to get my, the biggest muscle in the chest is the pec major. It's harder to get my pec major involved and to really load that and grow it. And so I'm going to have trouble looking the way that I want, because I'm not going to have good posture, one. And then two, I'm not going to be able to, because my posture is messed up and my form is messed up, it's going to be harder for me to load that larger muscle, the one that I really want to grow.
Yeah, so you find people, I would say, working against themselves.
Yeah, all the time.
And it's become, their solution would be not range of motion, it's more of just rep count, sets.
Right.
Just
volume.
getting as much volume as you possibly get.
Exactly. You see the same thing, you actually see the same thing with stomach.
Yeah.
Too. People are trying to form abs. So then let's say
crunch,
and they already have let's say they have really tight hip flexors. Hip flexors are muscles located on the front of your hip and in front of your hip and your thigh. So you have a lot of muscles that help flex your hip. So that would be like if you're thinking about bringing your knee up, that's hip flexion. Then when you straighten your leg and like push your hip forward, that's hip extension. So some people can be really tight in the hip flexors due to sitting, driving, stuff like that. And then they go to do a lot of stomach exercises and they feel it more in their hip and their legs because they're starting to use their hip flexors to come up in a sit-up, in a crunch, in a leg lift. And now they're already taking a muscle group that's been overloaded in volume and in resistance for long periods of time. And they're doing more of that in their intentional exercising. If you get really tight in the hip flexors, it starts to give you it starts to tilt your pelvis downward in the front, so it's called an anterior pelvic tilt. And if somebody has an anterior pelvic tilt, it's gonna give them kind of a sway in their lower back. So it's kind of like that, that arched back, that sway back, the lordosis, whatever you want to call it. And it's going to make you look like you have more stomach fat, especially lower belly fat. So you hear a lot of people complain of lower belly fat. It's gonna make it look worse than it is just purely based on your posture. Yeah. Right? And I don't think a lot of people realize that. And then that also leads towards pain and injuries. And as you start to get injuries and pain, that starts in. Same with the shoulder and chest asymmetry we were talking about. You start to get pain, you start to get injuries, you want to move less. So now your volume is drastically reduced and you're not getting results either.
It would just be, I think a good example of this, what I see a lot is either the RFE Bulgarian split squat is the hip flexor issue you're talking about. You see a lot of half reps with that. And if you're using that to grow muscle
or to become more athletic,
half reps just are not going to get it done.
I mean, if we're talking about
you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You see it all the time. It's literally halfway down and then back up, and it's like, man, I could probably do like 40 of those.
And that's really common because it's not. I don't like to blame people for this.
No, not at all.
Because if you don't have somebody watching you or you haven't given your own assessments to yourself, it's almost impossible. Over time, your body's going to do more and more of what they're comfortable with. So if you take somebody and you have them even do just like a bicep curl, right? Yeah. And then you have them do 2 years of bicep curls with no mirror. Even the mirror is obviously a huge part of the bicep curl.
You can't do it without a mirror. So
almost. I know, but it happens. But if you have somebody that's not paying attention to their form in a mirror, or you don't have somebody that actually watches another individual, or you're not assessing your movement, then even some of the smartest, most professional lifters are going to start to cheat because their body is going to start to do more and more what they're comfortable with because they're trying to load more. They're putting themselves in more uncomfortable situations, put more stress on the muscle, which makes sense. But sometimes they slowly slowly start to give up form, and that happens over time. So I think assessments and constant assessments and intervals, whether you assess yourself every 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is, I think are just so critically important. And then obviously if you're a professional, you should be assessing your clients all the time. The split squat's an interesting one because that brings up athleticism. So people will be like, oh, well, I
remember when we were doing split squats and I thought I was doing them right.
Right, that did happen,
And then you had to help me correct it, and then it made sense after that. But while I was doing it like by myself.
And that's a hard one to even watch yourself in the mirror, too. Yeah. There's a lot of different angles to look at, a lot of different things going on. You look at, you look at the depth, you look at where the knee is, you look at foot placement, you look at, there's just so many different factors, and it's such an uncomfortable exercise. Yeah. Actually, Hendy's doing them over there right now as we speak. We're in the gym doing the podcast, which is nice. The more complicated the exercise, the more things can go wrong when you're not assessed, you don't have somebody look at it, or you're not really paying attention consistently, and it can happen. And then that starts to affect a lot of different things, whether it be, again, injuries, body composition, or if we're talking about like the split squats, you get a lot in performance. So those half reps, you're doing something where you're really trying to get some knee and foot stability with some glute and hamstring activation. And then when you're not in that full range of motion, it's not happening, and you're used to staying within the range of motion that your other hip flexor is going to allow. So then when you go to do something athletic like sprint, since you're going to be more hip flexor dominant, it's going to be harder to get. One of the best ways to be faster is have a longer stride length.
Yeah.
And it's going to really affect your stride length if you're tight in those hip flexors. And then you're just going to be like, all right, well, I'm just not fast. I run all the time. I do this all the time. I work out. I do all the things I'm supposed to. But if you really just assess yourself and fix some of these issues, you'd be much faster, right?
Yeah, it's not just a blanket get stronger.
Right.
Because getting stronger doesn't necessarily mean how much you can push on, like from a weight standpoint, but also can you do it with the proper mechanics.
Exactly. That's a really, really
And I would say something that I get from this too is that the assessment support is important for sustainability.
Yeah.
For your fitness goals throughout life.
100%.
So I think the ultimate goal for anyone, I mean, at least what I gauge is everyone wants to be able to either look that way or close to looking good for as long as they can.
Yeah.
But how many people you see kind of cramp out at a certain time?
It's a quality of life thing, right?
Yeah.
All goals have to do with quality of life, every
Yeah.
goal. So whether you think your quality of life is going to be more improved by looking better, or more improved by moving better, or more improved by just being generally healthy and surviving without having any major setbacks, usually there's like a, if you could put it on percentages, there'd be a percentage for every person. Like some people are like, I put 80% into looking good and 10% into how I move, and then 10% more into just living this long. The main thing, I want to look good. And then you have like varying degrees of whatever for whoever. But they all do come back to, how can I use this to improve my quality of life?
Yeah.
So, yeah, I agree with that.
So when we're like assessing people, of course, you have your athletes, you have your general pop, and typically you look at the same things, but you're also looking at different things, depending on that person. Our typical general population person comes to you, what few tests are you using to, what key tests I would say when assessing the general population, especially during these types of years where like people are more sitting, more sedentary than I would say in
the
prior
first
years.
thing I would say, the first thing I want somebody to do, and I build everything off of that, is I want somebody to be able to squat well.
Yeah.
All right, so I look at the overhead squat, as do a lot of people. With the overhead squat, I've done it a lot of different ways over my lifetime and over my career. But I feel like the best way is just take a look at a couple things from the overhead squat and then break it down into simpler things, right?
Yeah.
If I look at the overhead squat and I see that ankle mobility could be an issue, like let's say the most extreme example, somebody squats in front of me and they come up on their toes and they can't keep their heels down. And if they put their heels down, they feel like they're going to fall backwards. I want to do something different to assess ankle mobility.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to take the squat and just circle ankle mobility and leave it at that. Right. Because I want to know more about what it is.
Yeah.
Is it, do you squat better with your heels raised? I want to know that. And then I'm like, okay, if they do, then I know it's ankle mobility. I would never have anybody squat that way, by the way.
Yeah. We know.
But just for assessment's sake, I don't want anybody taking this and be like, oh, so I should squat with my heels up. No, that's just the assessment part. Then I might take them to a wall test and go, okay, is there a difference between their left ankle and the right ankle, right? Is there, now I want to break it down into, is there an issue? Is it a soleus issue? Is it a gastrocnemius issue? Is it a combination? Maybe they have, you have a lot of muscles in your calf. Maybe they have a tibialis posterior issue. Maybe they have some like toe flexor or extensor issues as well. Maybe they're starting to have they've had some plantar fasciitis, stuff like that. Now I can start to dig into all that stuff.
Well, what's interesting about you bringing that up with the squat and everything, I feel like that's the cool thing about the assessment is you get to see how they sound like little things, ankle mobility and such like that, affect your squat, where I feel like when people say they're struggling with their squat, you get two answers. Your glutes and quads are weak, or you're too tight.
Right.
And that's typically what you hear. You know what I mean?
Because you'll get them that they'll be like, oh, well, and sometimes it's even like, oh, my therapist just said I'm really tight. And I'm like, well, yes, but
where,
let's
why.
figure.
Yeah.
I want to be able to give somebody a roadmap into being able to fix those things.
Yeah.
Right. I want to be like, all right, well, the way that you squat, like ankle mobility is like the easiest one because so many people have ankle mobility issues, right? So I want to be like, if I have somebody squat in front of me and they look like a newborn calf and they're like still falling all over the place and their knees are wobbling everywhere, and then I have their heels raised and they do a perfect squat. Again, it's somewhat of an extreme example, but it does happen like that. Then I can go, all right, here's how you squat right now. And then here, when I have your heels raised, here's how you squat when we started to give you some more ankle mobility to play with.
Yeah.
If you had more ankle mobility, here's how you would squat.
Yeah.
Right? So this is how important it is for you to get your calves to be more flexible. Also, sometimes like foot stability plays into it.
And it's not just more about the depth. Because you've seen people who have like decent depth, but they're hunched all the way over.
Because they're trying to create another angle, right?
Exactly.
The angle they can't get from their ankles, they try to break into their knees or into their hips, or what have you. You know, so I would say for general population, I center almost everything around the squat. And then I'll take a look at, from the squat, I go, is there something going on with the shoulders, the thoracic spine? If that is, I'll break it down into those and then figure out more about that, right? If their arms are falling forward, if they have a big lower body lean, I'll see if is it a hip flexor issue? Is there ankle mobility, right? Those are the three things I usually pull from the squat without anything else extreme going on or any kind of like pain history that I know about. Mostly I'll look at like shoulders, thoracic, spine. I'll take a look at hip flexor complex, and I'll take a look at ankle mobility, right? And then I'll do separate tests for like hamstrings. I'll do a separate test for glute activation and stuff like that. I want to see if somebody I might do like a plank. I like to do that with people to see if they can do a static, like non-moving anti-extension exercise for the core and not feel it in their back.
Yeah.
If they can do that, then I want to see some more advanced things, maybe some more dynamic things. If they can't do that, then I try to, that becomes a priority, and I want them to learn bracing and those kind of
So one of the general
strategies.
things, I think a lot of people, whether they do it right or not, will always look at someone's squat because it seems like the thing to do, right, for an assessment.
Right.
Like whether they know what they're talking about or not. They're going to be like, oh, let's see you squat.
Right.
Seen that a lot. I would say with a lot of people these days, you see not much scapular stabilization and a lot of internal rotation of the shoulders.
When they squat?
No, I'm just talking about in general, when they come to you, general pop. Most general population people have internally rotated shoulders.
Yeah.
And so how would you address that? So from an assessment standpoint, how would you... That's what a lot of people see.
I usually
people
my two
horizontally pressing with this internal rotation.
My
nonstop.
two go-to tests for that, I'll do, it's called an Apley scratch test. Very simple, them trying to touch their hands behind their back. So one goes over their back, the other one goes behind and underneath, and they see if they can touch their two hands. Sometimes they'll use a pole for that, so they'll try to grab a pole and see how close their hands can get. Like the FMS does that, the functional movement screen. So it's like pieces of that. I see if there's an asymmetry on one side or the other. Then I'll also take a look at their lats. So I'll do a lat test with them lying down.
Why would you look at my lats?
So the lats are very involved in internal rotation and in adduction. So the lats and the chest have a lot to do with each other, which I think a lot of people forget. So your pec major, so let's just talk about pec major and pec minor. We can talk about. So those are muscles on your chest that people think about. The pecs, they internally rotate your humerus, which is your upper arm bone, and they also adduct the humerus as well. And so that brings that upper arm bone closer to your rib cage, so it brings it down, right? And then they also press out and then push across your body, right? So those are the things that the pecs do. The lat, the two things it has in common with the chest and the pecs are that internal rotation of that upper arm bone, the humerus, and then also that adduction, so bringing it closer to the body. So I want to test lats because of that, because those when you have really tight lats, it can lead towards those rounded shoulders. My issue sometimes with people's programming is that they'll just separate chest and back, and if you want to correct some of that internal rotation, they'll be like, all right, we'll just do more back. but it's not that simple, because if you do something that is very lat dominant in the back, then you're going to end up with worse of the same issues. So you're going to end up more rounded. And this actually happened to me. I had a big problem with my lats being really tight. So what you really want to do when you start to get rounded that way is you want to work your medial and lower trap to help bring those shoulder blades back and more together and more stable, and open up your chest more and get away from some of your, if you have like an extreme example, get away from some more of your horizontal pressing. Right, Mike? Yes. We've all been there. We've all been there. For Mike. We've all been there. So get away from some of your horizontal pressing, and then get away from some of your adducted, like vertical pulling sometimes, because the lats are like big into like vertical pulling. If you wanted to use your lat a lot, you would pull something straight down, internally rotate, and then also bring your elbow down.
So don't have my shoulders glide forward on my lat pull down.
Yeah, that you. With any of those pulling or pressing exercises, you want to try to keep your scapula stable, which is another thing that we look at too. So we'll look at how people row or press or pull, and see if their scapula is doing a ton of movement, right? And if they have shoulder pain, they're like, well, you're losing some your glenohumeral joints. Like that's, if you think of your actual like where your shoulder socket is, you lose some mobility there if your scapula, so your shoulder blade is not stable. So if that's not stable, you're going to try to take stability from that glenohumeral joint, and you're going to start to lose some range of motion there. So sometimes working on, that's another thing with assessments, you got to figure out, is your best policy to mobilize something, or is it to stabilize something connected?
Yeah.
Right? I think I kind of got off track with it. I can get way off track with it.
No, it's good. It's a lot. It's a very in-depth topic, without a doubt. The next question I really have is, why, as a fitness professional, why is the assessment important to me?
I would think the biggest thing, again, is always safety and injury prevention. But also, I don't think the assessment, like an in-depth assessment, is done very much in the industry at all.
Yeah.
So as a professional, if we're just talking about a business standpoint, it really sets you apart.
Yeah.
For example, when people come to us and we do the assessment, we tell them what we're going to do, and it sounds kind of cool or whatever. But then they go through it, and there's usually 1, 2, 3 aha moments that happen. They're like, oh, wow, no one's ever told me this before.
Yeah.
And then they get a lot of motivation from that, because they're like, well, no one's ever told me this before. I've always had this issue. Maybe I can fix this issue. Yeah. Maybe I can have the body that I want. Yeah. Maybe I can run better than I ever thought I could, or jump, or like.
And running, you've had experience with that just recently.
Yeah.
A person like that. So, I mean.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. We got somebody to run that was told
they couldn't run.
Yeah, told they couldn't run. Yeah. All sorts of things. I mean, I have a bunch of things like that. But a good assessment can bring somebody a long way. And if you know if you take an assessment and then you know the proper progressions and regressions, and you're smart about those things, you can take people, if they're consistent, you can take people and get them to do some stuff they never thought they'd be able to do in their whole lives, and way up into whatever age. People think that they slow down at like 30, 40 years old, 50 years old, 60 years old. Mike, you're 60, and I think you're just only getting stronger, my friend. So who knows, when anybody actually slows down. Yeah. Not everybody can be like Mike, though.
Well, I would say typically, too, in this industry, you just don't, like I said, you don't see the assessment used a lot. In past years, you definitely don't see an assessment used a lot.
No, that's the other frustrating thing, that there's usually, some professionals do an assessment. This is more
when we first met, I didn't even know what the hell you were talking about. You know what I mean? So, and
it's not anybody's fault. It's more of the industry. It's an industry failure. So if I hear about somebody that was trained with a personal trainer and then came to me, I never blame the personal trainer that was training them, because they just never learned.
No, 100%.
And that's not their fault. And they only learn what their certification can give them.
Yep.
And
which is always biased.
Yeah.
Every certification is biased because they always have their model. So every certification is trying to push their model.
Exactly. So and then some certifications are very worried about, and I understand, because it's it's a very court-based society now. So they're very worried about liability and litigation and those kind of things. That makes sense. but then they don't want to go into some of those other things because they feel like some of those assessments are more for different disciplines, right?
Yeah.
And so the assessments that you see most often are conditioning assessments.
Yeah.
Right?
100%.
I mean, if I have somebody come in front of me, I don't care how many push-ups they can do.
Yeah.
I care if they can do a push-up on the floor. I care if I have to elevate it. I care
What
if
it
they have to
looks
do it
like.
off. Right.
Yeah.
I have to care if it has to be. I care what type.
Yeah.
I can figure out how many reps it needs to be within the first session that I train them.
Exactly.
You know, like I don't need to do a whole separate assessment to be like, all right, well, how many push-ups can you do? I think I can do 40. All right, well, we're going to test that today. Why?
Yeah.
What did I learn? If that person does 30 push-ups, did I learn more? Is there a difference between 22 push-ups and 35 push-ups? What is that? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, that doesn't really tell me anything. The only time where that becomes more important is if they're training for something like that, like a push-up contest or the military, or like they're trying to become a police officer where they're going to have a set amount of push-ups. Then it makes sense.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I just don't care.
Yeah.
You know, and then somebody does a step test on people, and it's like, all right, I'm going to take this person who hasn't been working out in the past 4 years, and I'm going to do a step test with them, and then I'm going to tell them whether they're in shape or not. Why the hell do I want to do that?
Yeah.
Like, I'm just going to be like, oh, well, you're out of shape. And they're probably just like, no shit, Dan, that's why I'm here. Like, I don't know what we did. We just wasted a bunch of time.
Exactly.
You know, and I could figure out where the conditioning is in the first session. Conditioning is like one of the easiest things to improve on somebody, to do with somebody. Like, if you take a random person and you put them in front of me, and let's say I can't really see what they look like, I can make no actual guesses, and I start working them out. So the only thing I know is how tired they are.
Yeah.
Right? Because you'll be able to tell that. You'd get perceived, you know. You can see their perceived exertion. So if I put them, let's say I put them on that sled over there, I'm going to know if I need to load the sled more, if I need to do less rest intervals, if I need to do, if they need to do more of a duration. I can figure that out and exhaust any individual in this world just by using the sled, right?
Yeah.
Anybody can do that. Conditioning is the easiest. Why do I have to test that? Unless they have something that they actually are testing for at conditioning based.
So as a fitness professional, I would say what I'm gathering from what you said is obviously the assessment, you point out what's going on with people, how they move, yada, yada. But also, too, it helps you as a trainer to properly program.
Yeah,
And
100%.
and give a more effective workout plan for someone. And at the end of the day, as a professional, you want that sustainability.
That's actually a really good point that I'd like to cover too. So if we're talking about a programming standpoint, let's say I don't do an assessment.
Yeah.
My first 2 or 3 sessions that they're paying for, mind you, because we do a free assessment, because I believe in a free assessment because it gives us a chance to show our value, and then people can figure out what they're actually buying, and then they can do whatever commitment they're going to do, right? So it works for both parties. If I don't do that and I just go, all right, I'm going to give you, I'm just going to have you start paying for workouts right away, or I'm going to give you one free workout or whatever, then my first couple times, if I'm not actually assessing the person, my first couple sessions are going to be very inefficient.
Yeah.
Right? And now I have somebody
Constantly stopping.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's like, oh, you feel this here? You're not supposed to feel it there.
Right.
What's going on here? Yeah.
And I could have, nothing's going to be, obviously at first, nothing's going to be at full efficiency until you know somebody more, but it gives you a much better chance, and you're just much further along. You're just much further along with your programming, doing that just one assessment than you would be otherwise.
Yeah.
And the other thing that it does, it builds a rapport with the trainer too, and it gives people more comfortable and trusting you and listening to you, because you're really focusing on their movement and their issues, and they don't feel like they're going through something cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Right? They're like, oh, Luke's asking me all these questions that no one's really asked me before.
Yeah.
And he's listening to what I'm saying. And then we're doing this movement based on this, and we're not going right into some other thing that somebody else did. And a lot of times when people are uncomfortable coming to the gym, the assessment's perfect because they don't feel like you're just going to go beat them up right away.
Exactly.
And some people want that, and they'll say that or whatever, and you can learn that about them, whatever. But then they go, okay, this was really smartly done. I feel comfortable. This person didn't try to make me feel stupid or confuse me or do any of this stuff. This person really just looked at my body, looked at what I wanted, listened to what I said, and then came up with a plan that was specific to me.
I mean, I would say we've had a lot of people, even this time I've worked with you, come and say they've stopped training somewhere else because they've gotten hurt. Because
that's happened a lot.
You know what I mean? But more because they're not being assessed.
Yeah.
So it's like those things you're talking about. If someone squats and they got the ankle mobility stuff going on, and it's just, well, you hear so many times, oh my gosh, I feel it in my knees, and then the response from the trainer usually is, push through it.
Yeah. Because
Right?
again, it's that.
And then
to me, that's not always.
It's a double-bladed sword for you because then they're going to stop training with you, and then you also give yourself a bad name.
Yeah.
So I would say the assessment is very important.
And there are some, there are sometimes like when some of that stuff happens, and then some people are just being idiots because there's some common sense when somebody's hurt. Like, there are some muscle things that you can push through, for sure. But anytime somebody tells me something is hurting in a joint, like I need to stop and figure out more about it.
Yeah.
Even if I don't even know what's going on, like before I even knew a lot of this stuff, I still wouldn't push through a lot of that stuff. I would wait, and then I'd ask them a bunch of questions about it, and then I'd try to figure it out.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I do feel like most of this is an industry. It's a failure as an industry, and it's getting better.
Yeah.
So it is getting better. The fitness industry is a fairly
evolving.
It's evolved a lot in its defense, and a lot of things have gotten a lot better. You can actually go to way more seminars that are smart and telling you more about how people move and like the science behind different things, which is just much better done instead of as many that are trying to push a particular product or line.
Yeah.
I mean, you still obviously get a lot of that. For sure. But,
100%.
But I do think a lot of it's gotten better. But I think that's also why we haven't seen a ton of the assessment and why that's got to be such a big thing and why it's so different right now. But now is the time to start doing it. Like if you don't do an assessment as a professional right now, you should start doing it.
Yeah.
If you're an amateur lifter and you're trying to get better at whatever your goal is, like better body composition, or you want to run faster or jump higher, or you want to be able to play a certain sport or whatever you're trying to do, you should look into different assessments and start to learn more about them.
We don't have to get into
a great resource for.
Yeah, we don't have to get into too much right now because we already have a podcast on this subject. But I would say not doing an assessment and then not looking at how someone moves can also cause a lot of plateaus people have because they're just not moving well. So a lot of it's not really a strength issue, just because you're not moving well.
You know, one of my favorite.
And people really get stuck in that plateau.
Let's address this.
Okay.
People. This is one that we get a lot.
Yeah.
And I feel like somebody should listen to this on this podcast. But let's say there's a lot of people. A lot of times, it's not just, a lot of times it's females, but people want butts.
Yeah.
Right. All right. And so then they'll go, I squat all the time, but I still don't have a butt.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, understand. And the first thing that happens in my mind is, how are they squatting?
Yeah.
And then we'll assess it and realize that there's not really any glute activation. We'll take that squat, and then because that is what they want, I might take them into like a Cook hip lift, which really shows almost a lot of glute activation. Like you need to have glutes that activate to be able to do that correctly. And if somebody can't, then they're not going to end up most likely with the butt that they want. So then I'll take those two things and be like, well, your glutes don't fire very well at all. And here's these issues in your squat. You're definitely not coming down to depth. You're not getting a lot of hip extension in your squat. You're very hip flexor dominant. There's a million different issues. So volume in your squats and your consistency is not the issue. It's literally how you move.
Yeah.
Right? So like that one I really want to cover because I hear that so often.
Yeah.
And as soon as somebody tells me that, I'm just like, I just want to see how you squat.
Yeah.
Like I just want to see how this is going. So
also, if you're trying
to
build your butt, it's pretty interesting using a quad dominant movement.
Yeah.
As you're focused.
Yeah. I mean, there's a million different things you can do.
Yeah.
The squat can work that way for sure. It is great.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But when somebody's not squatting to depth, and then they're not getting full hip extension when they come up, and they kind of go down, let's say, not even 90 degrees, right? So they come in well before that, and then they come up, and they still don't straighten the hip all the way.
Yeah.
And they just have that small range of motion. Like that is a very hip flexor dominant exercise now.
Yeah.
Right? They're not really using a ton of glutes, not a lot of hamstrings, so they're not going to end up with what they want.
Yeah.
Right? And then are you doing other glute accessory exercises, Like are you doing bridging concepts, like your hip thrust concepts and stuff like that?
Yeah.
For sure.
So I would say as a fitness professional, you would rank the assessment pretty high on not just building up a business, but also with clientele Also
I think
building
it
that
all
trust.
starts with the
Yeah.
assessment.
Yeah.
You know, like you said, it builds up the trust.
Yeah.
It shows your value. It differentiates yourself from the competition.
Yeah.
It helps a ton with your programming. It keeps people, it gives people more motivation because it's different. And they're like,
confidence.
oh, this makes sense. Yeah, confidence.
Because I would say the reassessment, as you touched on a little earlier, briefly, is just as important as the assessment.
One of the greatest things to do with
Yeah.
somebody is be like, hey, when we first did this, you couldn't do this, this, and this.
Yeah.
And then you show them again, and you be like, how easy is this
Yeah.
now? And they're like, oh my gosh, I couldn't do this before. Like
Yeah.
I don't care who you are and what your goal is.
Yeah.
That is a cool portion of whatever you're doing, right? That's
Yeah.
just a cool idea. I couldn't do this before. I've been doing this work, and now I can do this.
Yeah.
Right? That's amazing. I got
Yeah.
from A to B by doing exactly this, and it worked.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's very few things as motivating as that.
Yeah, and then as a professional too, you're able to naturally. We've all had this with clients, up and downs. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
like where something's going to be acting up, but being able to assess, you can assess them at that point and see what's going on, and then address it. So you're still able to train that person, but you realize what's going on. And does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. So what you're
Because I feel like some people will take off.
Yeah.
Or take time away from the gym when they feel these things, when you really don't have to. It's about almost just figuring out what's going on. How can we work around it, and how can we fix it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like so it's the unknown, right? If they don't know what's going on, then and you don't have the capacity to show them what's going on, then they're gonna be fearful.
Yeah.
Right. And there is nothing more fearful to a human being than the unknown.
Yeah.
Right. If you can figure out something and you can identify it, and then you can have a plan for it, then that helps. I mean, that just helps so much more.
Yeah.
It's so important. Again, that's where the assessment and the reassessment process comes in, so that you can figure out what those things are, and then you can work past barriers. I think also a lot of people, not that this always has to do with an assessment, but I always tell my clients that, and I try to remember this with myself, that we are a very imperfect species.
Yeah.
And as long as you're trending in the right direction, whether it's in weight loss or it's in muscle gain or it's in performance or whatever it is, then that's the most important thing. You're always going to have down days, right? So
It doesn't matter how elite you are.
Right. So
Does
some of
not
my
matter.
clients expect that every time they come to the gym, it's going
a
to be a
game.
peak day. I'm like, no, you're going to have your peak day on week 1 is going to be much different than your peak day on week 8.
Yeah.
That should happen. But you could have a great day in week 4
And it's not like
a
that
shitty day in
workout's-
week 5.
Yeah, and it's not
You
like
know?
that workout's crap. Like people, I would say, would take that workout and be like, "Oh, this was a
Yeah.
crap workout because I didn't peak."
Right. I
That's
mean, there's
not
some
the
days
case.
that I don't sleep very well, or some days that sometimes the volume bothers
Life
me, and I know I have to
Yeah.
I have to tail things off a little bit before I go back into more volume or whatever I'm going to do. I could be really stressed. So sometimes I'm just like, all right, I'm going to come in, I do my strength and power portion. It sucks. And I go, all right, well, I'm just obviously not going to perform well this day. I'm going to survive my workout. I'm going to make sure I do it. I'm just going to survive it. I don't really care whatever the performance is, as long as I stay within the parameters of my form and just do things that way, then everything else is whatever. As long as I can just finish it, then that's a win.
Yeah.
Not did I finish it at peak Danny Gilbert capacity.
Yeah.
I do want to have workouts that are
We all
like that,
wanna
but
be like that.
those are just gonna come and go, and then you just want to trend upwards.
Yeah.
So you're gonna be like up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, but then your ups are higher than your downs.
Yeah.
Is what you're looking for. So I think a lot of people forget that when they lift, and it frustrates them, and frustration can lead to a lack of motivation. A lack of motivation can work somebody right out of the gym.
100%. So I would say another thing too is with this assessment is the durability, the sustainability is what basically you're telling me the importance of all this is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we want the more consistent somebody can be and the more consistent that they can be.
Because this is the foundation of Madlab,
Yeah,
this assessment process that
for sure.
you help put together here
Yeah.
and pioneer.
Yeah, well, it's
Yeah.
come from a lot of different places.
Yeah.
For sure. I want somebody to be able to sustain what they're doing, because consistency is king in anything in life, certainly fitness. And I want things to be efficient too. Are you consistently coming in, and are you getting efficient programming, right? If you're consistently coming and getting efficient programming, then there really is no reason without getting extreme that you can't trend upwards.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what we're all trying to do all the time. We're constantly trying to trend upwards. I'm not about sitting in here and trying to toe the line of average. Right. We want to constantly be breaking through barriers. We want to constantly be trending upwards. We have some down days, but then can we have some up days? And then if we look at year one, does year two does a down day on year two look way different than a down day on year one?
Yeah.
Right. That's the kind of things we're looking for.
So as we're winding this down, one of the things I want you to go over for us is
I'm never winding down, Luke.
What should people expect with their first session with us? Meeting a Madlab trainer, what should they expect in that first assessment?
A lot of questions. So we ask a lot of questions because I don't like this. When I was a younger trainer and I got good at somewhat of the assessment process, I started to screw it up a little bit because I became too much of I just thought there was one way to do everything. And somebody would sit in front of me and they would say something, I'm like, well, they're quad dominant. So I'm just gonna work on the glutes, and or I'd come up with something before I even saw a move. Yeah. It was almost like I was just judging what I was gonna give them and programming based off their first couple words because I thought I was that good.
Yeah.
It's a human body. Human body is very complicated. Also, research is constantly improving in that arena as well and changing. So, and people have all sorts of injuries and history and all these things going on. You have to know. You can't. I mean, sometimes you could, but you run the risk of being wrong. And it took me being wrong a couple different times, some big eye-opening times too, to be like, oh shit, I really need to take this way more seriously. And a lot of questions is necessary. So sometimes people are like, even with their goals, some people are really surprised by the line of questioning. Because they'll be like, oh, I want to lose 20 pounds, Dan. I'll be like, oh, why do you want to lose 20 pounds? Oh, I just want to feel better. Have you been 20 pounds lighter before? Yes, it was like 5 years ago. Okay, what happened? Why did it change? What were you doing before? How did it feel? How do you feel now? And they're just like, well, wow, that's a lot of questions. But I want to know. I think when we really get down to the emotional, we really touch on the emotions of why they want to get where they want to get, that they become even more motivated because sometimes they haven't really thought about it. Yeah. So after that, I would say hour they're with us with the assessment and everything. I would say when they leave here, they leave very educated. Yeah, so and then they should have questions, right? Yeah. They should have questions in the assessment, and sometimes it's a little bit overwhelming, and I always tell them that. Yeah. Right? And then when they leave, I'll be like, I always give, they have direct access to us, and they can text any questions that they want. They can text, they can call, they can email, whichever the best form of communication is. Be like, oh, we did that test. What was it called? Oh, the Thomas test. What did you say was really tight on me? Which side was different? What is it? What is a TFL? What does that stand for? Stuff like that. Or they'll be like, I noticed when I did this, I didn't tell you about it because I forgot. The right side of my neck pinched when I did this. Yeah. Or whatever. Or after this, I know we didn't do a lot, but I'm really sore here. Do you know why that would be? And I'm like, da-da-da-da. And the more questions that they ask afterwards, the more information, and then that relationship grows from there, right? So, but that line of questioning and that assessment process is the building block for everything else that they want to do. Yeah. Right. And that's how I look at it. Anyway, if that makes any sense. Yeah. So, anything else you would like to add there, Sir Gilbert? Any final thoughts? I just think that everybody needs to be again, whether you are a fitness professional or you're just an everyday person coming in the gym and you want to lose 40 pounds or you want to just get some more muscle in your arms and your chest and your shoulders or whatever you want to do, right? I think you should school yourself more on different assessments and assessment processes. Certainly if you're in any pain, you should be more familiar with certain muscular assessments and figure out some things that are going on as well. And I really think that everybody, we have a chart that we use for mobility and stability, and I think everybody should take a look at that first. Every joint in the body wants to do something. Yeah. Right? Not to carry this on too long, Luke, because I could talk. It's a great final thought. I could talk about it for another 4 hours, probably. But I think that some people like will look directly at whatever is hurting them. So they'll be like, oh, my knee hurts. So what are some things that surround the knee? So then they'll look at like some muscles around the knee, or they'll look at, maybe they're worried that they might have some cartilage off, which is possible, or like they have a ligament issue or whatever. But I think the surrounding joints are also important. Like the foot wants to be stable, right? So if the foot's not stable, then it's going to try to take stability from somewhere else. So it'll try to take stability from two mobile joints. Like toes are supposed to be mobile, ankle's supposed to be mobile. If my foot is not stable, my foot's going to be like, all right, the foot, we're obviously not stable, so let's get stability from one of these other joints, from my neighbors. So then you have people that start to have like big toe problems, or they lose ankle mobility. And you can work on ankle mobility all day long, and it'll get slightly better. But if you never fix that foot stability, you're never going to get where you want that person, or if it's yourself, where you want yourself to be with your ankle mobility. And you're still going to struggle with the same things that you were struggling before.
Yeah.
You want knee stability? Look at your hips, look at your ankle. If your knee's not stable, maybe your hips aren't very mobile, or maybe your ankle's not very mobile, and they're making the knee more mobile because they're trying to get into mobility from the knee, which is very dangerous, right? I think a big one before we sign off here is lower back. People are like, oh, my lower back always bothers me. Well, how mobile are your hips, right?
What does my hips have to do with my lower back?
That's a lot of people say, right? So if you don't have mobility in your hips, then it's going to try to make your lower back more mobile. It's going to try to get mobility from that lower back, right? As your lower back starts to get more mobile, it's supposed to be, those vertebrae in your lumbar spine are supposed to be pretty stable. So if it starts to get mobility from there, you're going to end up with some issues. And as it starts to get more extreme, those issues can start to get more extreme as well. And that goes to any joint in your body. You want to take a look at your neck, or your shoulder, or like your thoracic spine, or your hips, or your knee, or whatever it is. Even down to like your wrists and your fingers and stuff like that. So I think that's a really important place to maybe start, and then start to look at different things from there and be like, okay, I have a lower back issue. Thoracic spine and hips connect to lower back. How do I assess mobility in the thoracic spine? How do I assess mobility in the hips? Start from there.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome stuff. Longest final thoughts ever, but it's all good. It's all good.
I got even more than that if we're talking about this Popeyes line out here and what's going on in this parking lot. But we talk about that all the time.
I hope that everyone loved our content today. And if you have any questions, any concerns, and just want to learn more, please visit us on our social media page, one of our social media pages, Facebook and Instagram, and then also at madlabperformance.com.
Questions and compliments go to me. Insults and concerns go to Luke. Remember that.
He built character.
That's it. And you much needed character for Luke, the Patriot, Hillman. Thank you, everyone, for listening to another episode of The Lab.